Hey, freedom fighters, we are back in chapter 13 in Psycho-Cybernetics. And we have been doing a chapter a day and about to come around third base and heading into home plate. We've only got three chapters left, the final three. And today we're going to be reading How to Turn a Crisis into a Creative Opportunity. I know a younger golfer who holds the all time course record for his home course. It has never even placed in a really big tournament. When playing by himself or with his friends or in small tournaments where the stakes are low, his play is flawless. Yet, each time that he gets into a big tournament, his game deteriorates. In the language of Goldfam, the pressure gets him. Many baseball pitchers have pinpoint control until they find themselves in a situation where the chips are down. And they choke up, they lose all control, and they appear to have no ability whatever. On the other hand, there's many athletes, they perform better under pressure. The situation itself seems to give them more strength, more power, and more finesse. Now, why is that? Well, people who come into their own in a crisis. For example, John Thomas, the record breaking high jumper from Boston University, he often performs better in competition than in practice. February 1960, Thomas set a new world record, clearing 7 feet 1 1/4 inches at the U.S. Indoor Championships. His highest previous jump in practice had only been 6 feet 9 1/4 inches. That's 4 inches higher, dude. That's a third of a foot just through turning the crisis into a creative opportunity. That's all he did. Channeled that energy. It isn't always the baseball player with the highest batting average who's called upon as a pinch hitter in a tough spot. The manager frequently turns down the man with the highest batting average for a player who's known to come through in the clutch. You get known for your skills and capabilities if you come through in a crisis and you do it multiple times. You now become known as the one that can come through in a clutch. One salesman may find himself inarticulate in the presence of an important prospect. His skills desert him, while another salesman, under the same circumstances, may just sell over his head. The challenge of the situation brings out abilities he doesn't ordinarily possess. You ever heard someone who's dumped with so much adrenaline in the crisis of a car being flipped over, and then they just can push through and lift up that car and save their kid? You're thinking to yourself, maybe, well, that's adrenaline, and that's a car, a life or death situation. This is just selling somebody something as a salesman coming through. Don't you believe that there's also similar chemicals, including adrenaline, that may even be produced or released in these challenging or crisis situations, as the chapter title is calling this? It's it's happening to both salesmen. It's happening to the one who chokes and the one who sells over their head, realizing skills they didn't even know they had capable to them. The mother of the daughter trapped underneath the car had strength that she didn't even know that she had in her. It's already there. We're already able to do really an infinite amount of things. It's just tapping into the belief. And then the automatic mechanism. The the subconscious mind will release the chemicals in the body needed to flex the muscles, to tense your grip, to loosen your jaw and relax your gaze and go into the zone, whatever the situation describes, that we become bigger and better than we're capable of doing. This chapter is going to teach us how to tap into that. Many women are charming and gracious when talking to one person or a small informal group, but become tongue tied, awkward, and dull at a formal dinner or a big occasion. You ever heard of, well, myself included, who can speak just fine to somebody, their boss? Doesn't matter who it is, if it's in a working environment, but the moment they have to speak to many, all of a sudden their palms start to sweat, their stomach starts to be filled with butterflies, they start to breathe more shallow, and they start to get panicked, and they could sweat and they could stutter or um not the word stutter their words, but just kind of like sound like a lamb. You're just kind of like you know and it's happened to me so many times, and when it's happening, before it's happening, and after it's happening, I'm saying, what the heck just happened? How did that happen to me? I don't feel like I'm scared to speak in public. I may be one of the few that doesn't have that thought run through their head before they have to speak, but then I'm like, why the heck am I so scared? I've literally presented in front of audiences, even just while seated. Okay, I didn't have to stand up in front of a whole audience. While seated with a laptop in front of me, speaking to, some projection board, and I'm like terrified. I'm like, what the heck? That's learning how to overcome and rise above and turning a crisis into a creative opportunity. This stuff just seems to happen naturally to us without our control, yet we're able to tap into something that's bigger or greater than us. And in those moments, like most people, I just started talking and pushed through. And then all of a sudden, like a minute later, those nerves left me and I got super comfortable. And I was performing in ways that either to the abilities and knownness, then rising up and actually performing the way I expected myself to be, or maybe even gone a little bit above and beyond, like what this chapter is describing. If I had just stayed quivering the entire time and never somehow allowed those thoughts to just kind of release from me, I probably would have performed less than my known capabilities. I wouldn't have probably been dramatically less so, but I still would have sucked and said worse things and at least felt worse about myself. But the interesting thing here, it's not like I knew or I was turning it on like a light switch or I desired to. It seemed to happen automatically. And in this chapter, just describing, how some ladies can just speak graciously with one person or even a small informal group, but become tongue tied, awkward, and dull at formal dinners or big occasions. It's just like what I'm describing. On the other hand, I know a little lady who comes into her own only under the stimulus of a big occasion. If you had a dinner with her alone, you would find her very ordinary. Her features are not particularly attractive. Her personality is somewhat on the drab side, but all this changes when she attends an important party. The stimulus of the occasion awakens and brings to life something within her. Her eyes acquire a new sparkle. Her conversation is witty and charming, and even her facial features, they seem to undergo a change. You can find yourself thinking of her as a beautiful woman. Now, there are students who do extremely well in day to day classwork, but they find themselves, their minds a blank when they're taking an exam. There are other students who are ordinary in classwork, but they just kill it on the finals. That's me. I would like study the night before, wake up, and then just like ace these exams in college. And that's one of the only ways that I got a C minus and passed in my very first semester in ME 1000 for mechanical engineers. The professor himself basically emailed me at the end of the semester and said, "Are you serious about being an engineer? Because if you are, you need to," excuse me, I don't remember the rest of it. If you are, you basically need to like wake up. You need to come to class. See, I found my now wife, but then girlfriend, and I didn't go to class. Sometimes I'd send her to class and take notes for me. But even though we were both ditching together most of the time, uh, I didn't do my work. I rarely did work my whole life. I was like, when they say B's and C's get degrees, that's me. And I definitely wasn't like a 2.0, like C student all the time. Um, Maybe just senior year. It was like 1.8 or 1.7, something crazy like that. I was failing gym the last quarter of the year, my senior year, fourth quarter. They wouldn't let me graduate because it was gym class and I was friends with the coach and I was messing around and I probably never went to school. I remember having to run laps around the track early in the morning at the end of the year, like forever, just to get enough that he would pass me so I could graduate. I wasn't that guy. I'm not telling a story like that's my story, but I remember such things. And I would pass these classes in college to literally move on. The only class that I ever got A's in, and they were never straight, they were minuses. The only class I ever got A minuses or A's in college were the math ones, like calculus, ordinary differential equations, partial differential equations. I mean, these are all the requirements in mathematics to get my engineering degree. And I actually love math. Like, I don't know why. I can just like show up and get freaking A minuses in these absurd maths that I know I can't do, like, immediately right now if you called upon me to do them. Dude, I don't think I remember how to differentiate or integrate freaking anything, even the basics. I'd have to Google it and refresh myself because I don't use it in a mathematical equation. I'm not thinking like Newton did. I just think in observation, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I algebra is in everywhere. Like my everyday life, I'm doing algebra in my head all the time, solving for an unknown variable, like all the time. And especially now in business, it's like you've got an equation and you put a bunch of stuff together to get an answer. That's an unknown variable on the equal side is still a simple mathematics equation of A plus something B divided by C minus D, something like that. Okay. We do this all the time. And it's just crazy to me how this stuff just becomes automatic and it allows us to step into something that we didn't know we had, but they're learned. Okay, all of these behaviors are learned on how we react to in a crisis. It's saying, the secret of the money player. The difference between all these persons is not some inherent quality or one that hasn't that he has and he doesn't have, she has and she doesn't have. It's largely a matter of how they learned to react to certain situations. Even if you've done it your whole life, you can change it. You can learn a new skill. You can learn a new reaction way of dealing with your environment. Yesterday's chapter taught me that I can just delay the onset of my anger just by counting to 10. Just by delaying the onset of my anger, I likely shift the entire energy and learn a new reaction to a crisis situation rather than knee jerk reaction and freaking out and letting the fuse instantly burn to crack the dynamite. I can extend the fuse and it's lit. And the fuse allows me to remain relaxed, not tense up. And I can learn a new reaction to a crisis mechanism. And I might see in my life, like, wow, where I would have normally cracked like a firecracker and blown up in this situation or said something awful. I wanted to, but I delayed the fuse, like counted to 4, counted to 10. And then I might realize, like, wow, I was able to divert that altogether and learn a new reaction mechanism to crises. And all of a sudden, I've just got an automatic way of just staying chill and calm and like responding at a loving energy state. If I was going to, I've never described or talked about through this podcast about my understanding of our emotions and the way we feel and how it has different energy vibrations. There's a certain doctor who characterized this and basically described that like at the base level is a level energy wave of say 500, and you're going to be able to raise those levels as you get closer to joy, happiness, love, all these things. And then down here in like the single or double or 3 digits, the sub 500s, the really low levels of energy state are like hate, anger, guilt, shame, the 7 deadly sins, that's been characterized. And what I'm realizing is, that we're able to control this. We're able to learn a new reaction to a crisis with some instructions or automatically in our environment or modeling our parents, teachers, our friends, people we know, like, and trust the most. It's automatic. So it's either learned through intent or learned through the subconscious programming that which we're doing automatically. We don't even realize that our hands are on the keyboard, programming software language into our subconscious hardware system. The programming goes in and tells our hardware, our body, our physical body, and all the chemicals and all the stuff to do things without us realizing it's sending commands and doing it. And even if we intentionally tell it to do certain commands, like publicly speak, sell to somebody, lift these weights, the subconscious programming kicks in and says, all right, we just got a command from Mission Command Control Center, the main command boss, our level 2 conscious brain, kicking into gear, execute sequence number 1425, and then automatic program for 1425 kicks in. Let's go. There's like 2 programs running, one from your conscious mind that says, "Hey, we're gonna speak in public," and the subconscious programming that's already been put there by you for somehow, somewhere is also running in, and whichever one is more dominant kicks in and overrides the other program. And so now, subconscious program of "you were terrified speaking in public" kicks in, and my conscious brain is like, "What's going on? Why am I feeling all clammed up? Stop, stop, turn off the brakes. I want to feel normal right now. I don't want to be scared before I have to go on, and my armpits are perspiring, my palms are sweaty, and I'm like, knots in my stomach. And it's like I can feel the adrenaline coursing through my bloodstream because it's like vibrating. It feels like butterflies all over my stomach. And that's what's happened. But now, for some reason or another, these are largely a matter of how we learn to react to a crisis situation. If I could train, practice, and learn a new technique, now what's happening is you're programming the subconscious program number, whatever I said, it was a random number, 1000 something something. It went over here, and now it's being programmed to do something different. So you're rewriting the software. You're tapping into your subconscious mind. You're practicing. You're learning a new technique. You're keying in on the keyboard. And now this is an intentional programming. It's not an unintentional or an automatic programming like we talked about with the nature and the nurture of our environment, right? Well, what we're talking about now is learning a new technique. And when your conscious mind now says it's programming coming in, there's a command from mission command, command control center, whatever. The level 2 conscious mind is saying, we're going to speak in public. Now, the little control center says, all right, run command sequence number 1 from your conscious mind. Now run command sequence number 2 from the subconscious programming. Let's go, kick them into gear. Now they're aligned. Now they're doing the exact same thing. And you get 2 Clydesdales with 4 horsepower than the 1 Clydesdale at 1 horsepower. Or in this case, it's whichever one won out. Is like it's your subconscious programming, which more often than not is going to win out over your conscious programming. It's going to say, okay, we're terrified to speak in public. You're going to die. On the other side of this public speaking gig, we don't know what exists. Therefore, it's the same as the unknown, which is death. Preserve all life. Send all of these flight mechanisms, the fight or flight chemicals, through the body. Send the signal to the body to get out. We are going to die. And all of a sudden, your body is flooded with chemicals as if you're being chased by a lion. And you're sitting in your chair ready to present to a group of your colleagues and management and bosses and bosses' bosses and whoever it may be. And now it's the same as being chased by a lion. Yet while I'm pumping the gas, my foot's on the brake. I'm literally in the middle of a room. No one's chasing me. I can't get up and run away from it. So my body is pumping the brake while my chemicals, my brain is sending a flood of endorphins, of chemicals, whatever the chemicals may be. I might not know exactly what's flooding through my body at that time. It's definitely adrenaline, and it's slamming on the gas. My foot's on the brake and I'm slamming on the gas. And it's no wonder that that programming takes over and my palms are sweaty. I've got mom's spaghetti. This is my one shot. The Eminem song. That's exactly what's going on with him right then and there. He doesn't want to be panicked. He doesn't want to throw up in the bathroom, and he wants to go out and rap, and he wants to battle with someone and destroy them as he's capable of doing. He's done it before. This is the finals, the championship. All the crowd outside is cheering. Yeah, let's go Rabbit. Let's go Rabbit. Come on. Come on out. And he's like, dude, I don't want to be scared right now. I want to go out and slam it. But how many times in that movie, 8 Mile, did Eminem like piss himself and not perform to his capabilities? Sure, it's a hero story. Sure, it can't end the movie with him puking in the bathroom. No. What happened was he rose up to a crisis situation and he pushed through when it was uncomfortable. But had he been practicing a lot like this, you can actually start to learn this. A crisis is a situation which can either make or break you. If you react properly to the situation, a crisis can give you strength, power, wisdom you don't normally and ordinarily possess. If you react improperly, a crisis, it can rob you of the skill, control, and ability that you ordinarily have to call upon. The so called money player in sports, business, or in social activities, the person who comes through in the clutch, who performs better under the stimulus of challenge, is invariably the person who's learned either consciously or unconsciously to react well to crisis situations. In order to perform well in a crisis, we need to learn certain skills under conditions where we're not over motivated or we won't be needing to practice without pressure. We need to, number two, learn to react to a crisis with an aggressive rather than a defensive attitude, to respond to the challenge in the situation rather than to menace it, keeping our positive goal in mind. Number three, we need to learn to evaluate the so called crisis situations in their true perspective, not making mountains out of molehills or react as if small challenge were just a matter of life or death. And the one way to do this, if you aren't aware how to take your mind from the other side of the unknown, which is like what happens when I get up and speak publicly. It's unknown to me. Now it's equivalent to death. It's a life or death situation in my this challenged my subconscious. It's just to go beyond that, to take your vision and then go beyond the vision. In this case, it's not a dream that you want. It's not your big, wildest, audacious goals that seem so impossible to accomplish. And you went to that vision and said, what happens tomorrow if I wake up and all this stuff was to just come true? Then what next? And go beyond the vision. And now all of a sudden you've got a vision beyond your vision. And you're like, wow, dude, for me, it's like infinite possibility when it's all these multiple universes and realities of which I accomplished my vision. Wow, that was crazy. Now my actual vision seems like absurdly easy to accomplish. Whereas before, it seemed really big and large and audacious, and my mind was like, "Dude, that's death. The other side of that, we don't know." So it keeps me from my goal. The same micro goal, the microscopic goal of speaking in public, what goes beyond the fear of what happens when I speak, we're like, yeah, well, like the worst thing that could happen is like I screw up and I get told I have to go back and redo my presentation again and come back with more data, more evidence and speak again. And that's happened before. And I know that's the worst that could happen. What's the best that could happen? Well, like this is like it would be awesome. And I would just be like short and sweet and get out of there and not have to come back because I solved the problem already. Yeah, it's a matter of how effective I communicate. I was often communicating very difficult concepts into a high level terms for everyone to understand because there's bosses on a phone or in person or whatever. They don't know the freaking technicalities of what I'm describing. They don't understand, and it's not meant for them to understand. There's a problem. Simplify the problem into the simplest way and simplest terms to communicate to a fifth grader. And now this hard problem becomes an easy way to fix because I need to get people on board. It's like being a salesman. I needed people to join on board with me in my way of thinking, and I could see the solution here. But I needed to get everyone to be able to agree that this was rational way of thinking. He's looked at this objectively, used evidences and datas, hypotheses, experiments, come up with an answer and solution, and he's proposed to me and repeated it over and over and over enough times to give me confidence. Now let me hear what he's saying, and convinced them in a way to believe and adopt what I believed, taking complex into simple and communicating it to many. That's what Einstein described as genius, and that's what I had to do, being the genius that we all are. We are all geniuses. I had to tap into my genius to get a positive effect. I tapped into my, excuse me, the opposite of my genius and screwed up many times to the negative effect. And it would make me have to repeat my work. So it was more of which one did I want to program? Which one do I want to call upon? And which one do I want to practice more of and becoming more of? But at the end of the day, it all came down to me recognizing first that this was an automatic mechanism that I could train and program. So I had to, as it says, in order to perform well in a crisis, I had to learn certain skills under conditions where I'm not over motivated. I need to practice without pressure. So I had to make those large audience rooms where there was say nobody of importance or value on the other end. I had to what once was a little bit scary, but like the least scary of all my situations. I had to practice enough times where I didn't feel that I was pressure, like it was routine, like I would be speaking every day. And I had to just learn those skills under those conditions where I wasn't over motivated. It just now I could graduate and escalate to bigger audiences. And as soon as I did that repeatedly, such it became easier for me to speak in larger gatherings and larger audiences where there, you know, more pressure to take the complex message to simple and communicate to all technique. I wouldn't always be able to do that. And especially if I got tense, I would say the wrong thing. I'd get too complicated. I'd fall to my default, which was getting really, really detailed and technical and verbose about concepts that most people probably didn't understand unless they were working on the problem. And I'd screw up and I wouldn't get people to buy into my comments and statements and get on board. I would have lost the sale to whatever concept or thought I was trying to communicate. And then step two, we need to learn to react to crisis with an aggressive rather than a defensive attitude, responding to the challenge in the situation rather than to menace or to keep our positive goal in mind. So rather than me viewing this thing as like a challenge to my capabilities, I didn't get defensive and say I'm getting punched in the face and I'm going to punch back. I was aggressive. I became viewing this as the positive goal, the outcome that I wanted, and I aggressively pursued it. And I challenged myself to practice in environments and get more comfortable. I didn't view it as this is an undesired situation and I'm going to die. I went to the vision beyond the vision and I was like, it's going to go just fine. Even if I have to come back here and do it again, it's not like I die. It wasn't a big deal to take the less desired outcome of the alternative two solution. The first desired outcome was like, I'm going to crush it and I'll have to speak again and I won't come back. That's my desired. And that was my aggressive goal with the positive goal end in mind that I went after. And step three, we need to learn to evaluate these so called crisis situations in their true perspective, not making mountains out of molehills or react even as if every small challenge were a matter of life or death. So I normalized the pain. I went to my coach at the time, was my direct boss, and I normalized the pain with him. I was like, I'm experiencing this. He's like, you're like me. You're talking and going around a bush. You need to go from the introduction and start here and go in a straight line to the finish, to the end of the conclusion. And for you, you need to maybe like put like, what's the purpose, the introduction? What were the observations? What was the data, the summary, and then the conclusion? Like you need to put these things, even if you're putting them on a slide and presenting and talking, because you need to be able to think in a straight line. And once I started doing that, I started communicating much more effectively and more to the point. And it was less about life or death. I made less mountains out of molehills. He normalized the pain. It was like, this is not a big deal. You're just talking around in circles. And, he didn't say it, but I interpreted it as like I'm picking up more work because I'm having to come back here again and speak more and do more stupid stuff because I'm going around in circles rather than going right in a straight line to the point and getting people to understand what I already understand. But you have to take complex ideas and simplify them to be able to communicate to all. And that's what a straight line selling, straight line, a lot of things. Yeah, that's the Wolf on Wall Street's example. If you don't know that reference, go read or listen to on Audible, The Wolf on Wall Street. It's a good book. But making those molehills out of the real molehills and using your own creative capabilities, the supernatural powers are already in you. I had to discover them in me. And there's a lot that I've yet undiscovered. I still have a lot of, subconscious programming that I'm working to reprogram intentionally. I'm no way near a perfect person. No one's perfect, but I'm not like way further ahead in life than you are who's listening to this podcast episode. The whole purpose of this for me is running a thought experiment and practicing new things, new ways of thinking. Maybe ways of thinking I'm already doing. I'm just being reminded to do them either more repeatedly, a better, or a new way of doing them that I thought I already knew, which is now, in effect, learning something new rather than I already knew it and getting better at what I already knew. The first step to responding well in a crisis is to practice without pressure. Although we may learn fast, we don't learn well under crisis conditions. Throw a man who can't swim into water over his head, and the crisis itself may give him the power to swim to safety. He learns fast and he manages to swim somehow, but he'll never learn to become a championship swimmer. The crude, inept stroke that he used to rescue himself becomes fixed, and it's difficult for him to learn better ways of swimming. Because of his ineptness, he may perish in a real crisis where he is required to swim a long distance. Dr. Edward C. Tolman, psychologist and expert on animal behavior at the University of California, he says both the animals and men form brain maps or cognitive maps of the environment with which they're learning. If the motivation is too intense or if there's not too much of a crisis present in the learning situation, these maps are broad and general. But if the animal is overmotivated, the cognitive map is narrow and restricted. He learns just one way of solving his problem. And in the future, if this one way happens to be blocked, the animal becomes frustrated and fails to discern alternative routes or detours. He develops a one response, cut and dried, preconceived, and tends to lose the ability to react spontaneously to a new situation. He cannot improvise, he can only follow a set plan. Pressure retards learning. Dr. Tolman found that if rats were permitted to learn and practice under non crisis conditions, they later performed well in a crisis. For example, if rats were permitted to roam about and at will and then explore a maze when well fed and well plenty to drink, they didn't appear to learn anything. Later, however, if the same rats were placed in the maze hungry and showed that they had learned a great deal by quickly and efficiently going to the goal, hunger faced these trained rats with a crisis to which they reacted well. Other rats, which were forced to learn the maze under the crisis of hunger and thirst, they didn't do so well. They were overmotivated and their brain maps became narrow. The one correct route to the goal became fixated. If this route were blocked, the rats became frustrated and had great difficulty learning a new one. That's interesting. So, when they were well fed and well hydrated, let them randomly roam about this maze, not stressed out and thinking only about how the heck do I get out of here. And they're casual about, and they were learning the new technique. And then their minds were able to learn. And when now put under pressure, they were more creative and spontaneous at solving their problems, and they went right to the cheese. Now put a new rat in the new situation, in the fight for the death to get your cheese maze here. When they were learning the new skill under a heightened awareness amount of stress, they were hungry and they were thirsty. They went to the one way, their first option, like I'm going to go this route, and then they became fixated on that one route, and they were lost. They could have died if the human beings didn't intervene, because their brain maps became so narrow, and they were over motivated, overstimulated. They were lost, hungry, and thirsty rather than just lost. When there was no crisis situation, when they were full and hydrated, and they're just like, shit, I can walk around for hours here aimlessly till I find this cheese because I'm not really that hungry. I don't care. I just want to get out. I'm just lost. So the more intense the crisis situation under which you learn, the less you learn. A professor of Harvard University trained two groups of rats to solve a maze to get food. One group, which hadn't eaten for 12 hours, learned the maze in 6 trials. A second group, which had eaten nothing for 36 hours, required more than just 20 tries. 6 trials. Starve them 3 times as long, and it takes them more than 3 times, 20 times. 3 times would have been 18. More than 3 times longer to get it right. Fire drills teach crisis conduct in non crisis situations. People react in the same way. Persons who have to learn to get out of a burning building will normally require 2 or 3 times as long to learn the proper escape route as they would if no fire were present. Some of them don't learn it at all. Over motivation, it interferes with the reasoning process. The automatic reaction mechanism, it's jammed by too much conscious effort. Trying too hard. Something akin to purpose tremor develops, and the ability to think clearly is lost. The ones who do manage somehow to get out of the building, they've learned a narrow, fixated response. Put them in a different building or change the circumstances slightly, and they react as badly as the second time around as the first. But you can't take these same people and let them practice a dry run. Fire drill when there's no fire. Because there's no menace, there's no excessive negative feedback to interfere with clear thinking or correct doing. They practice filing out of the building calmly, efficiently, and correctly. After they practice this a number of times, they can be counted on to act upon the same way when an actual fire breaks out. Their muscles, nerves, and their brain have memorized a broad, general, flexible map. The attitude of calmness and clear thinking will carry over from practice drill to actual fire. Moreover, they'll have learned something about how to get out of any building or cope with any changed circumstances. They're not committed to a rigid response, but will be able to improvise and react spontaneously to whatever conditions may be present. They've learned all the skills, the techniques, the brain mapped out all these possible alternatives when there was no fire present. And now that the fire is present, they're spontaneous and able to react to one of those solutions because they've learned how to escape. It's muscle memory, and now they're just responding to their environment spontaneously. The moral is obvious for either mice or men. Practice without pressure, and you'll learn more efficiently, and you'll also be able to perform better in a crisis situation. Shadowboxing for stability. The gentleman Jim Corbett made the word shadowboxing popular. When he asked how he developed the perfect control and timing for his left jab, which he used to cut John L. Sullivan, the Boston strong boy, to ribbons, he replied that he practiced throwing his left at his own image in the mirror more than 10,000 times in preparation for the bout. Gene Tunney did the same thing. Years before he actually fought Jack Dempsey in the ring, he fought in an imagery Dempsey more than 100 times in the privacy of his own room. He secured all the films of old Dempsey fights and he watched them until he knew every one of Dempsey's moves. Then he shadowboxed. He would imagine that Dempsey was standing before him. When the imaginary Dempsey would make a certain move, he'd practice his counter move. Sir Harry Lauder, the famous Scottish actor and comedian, he once admitted that he'd practiced a certain routine 10,000 times in private before ever giving the performance publicly. Lauder was, in effect, shadowboxing with an imaginary audience. Bill Graham preached sermons to cypress stumps in a Florida swamp before developing his compelling platform personality with live audiences. Most good public speakers, they've done the same thing in one way or another. The most common form of shadowboxing for public speakers is to deliver their speech to their own image in the mirror. One man I know, he lines up 6 or 8 empty chairs, imagines people sitting in them, and practices his speech on an imaginary audience. Wow, that's wild. If you can actually trick your mind and body into believing that there's human beings sitting in front of you, and you could just line up chairs and speak into an empty auditorium, but imagine them filled up and the emotions that would trigger as a response of that, and you can practice in that environment. Easy practice brings better scores. When Ben Hogan was playing tournament golf regularly, he kept a golf club in his room and daily practiced in private, swinging the club correctly and without pressure at an imaginary golf ball. When Hogan was on the links, he'd just go through the same correct motions in his imagination before making a shot, and then, depending upon his muscle memory, he would execute the shot correctly. Some athletes practice in private with as little pressure as possible. They, or their coaches, they refuse to permit the press to witness any of these practice sessions. They even refuse to give out any information concerning their practice for publicity purposes, just in order to protect themselves from any kind of pressure. Everything is arranged to make sure the training and the practice is as relaxed and pressure free as humanly possible. The result is that they go into the crisis of actual competition without appearing to have any nerves at all. They just become human icicles, as they say, immune to pressure, not worrying about how they'll perform, but depend upon the muscle memory to execute these various motions which they've just learned. This technique of shadowboxing, or practice without pressure, is so simple, and the results are so striking that some people are inclined to associate it with some sort of magic. Woo woo, as they would say. I remember a dog wagger, a doe wagger, I don't know what this word is, for example, who for years had been jittery, felt ill at ease at social situations after practicing shadowboxing. She wrote me, I must have practiced making a grand entrance in my own empty living room just 100 times or more. I'd walk down the room and shake hands with the innumerable imaginary guests, and I smiled. I had something friendly to say to each one, actually saying the words out loud. Then I moved about and among the guests, chatting here and there. I practiced walking, sitting, talking gracefully and self confidently. I can't tell you how happy I was. I might have said what some were surprised at the wonderful time that I had at the GT ball. I don't know why there's such long stretched out brackets after those letters, if I even should have been stuttering there or not. But I felt relaxed and confident. So interesting. If that was actually a thing, maybe it's once she had to speak the thing out loud, the name of the thing, it would have made her nervous. But she's recanting that several situations came up which I hadn't anticipated, not practiced, but I found myself ad libbing them admirably. My husband is sure that you worked some sort of mumbo jumbo on me. So this was just a letter from one of her clients, from one of his clients to himself, teaching her this technique of practicing uh, without pressure, or shadowboxing, as they're calling it. Shadowboxing turns on self expression. The word express literally means to push out, to exert, or to show forth. You express a dookie in the bathroom, you're pushing one out. The word inhibit means to choke off, restrict self expression, is a pushing out, or a showing forth of the powers, talents, and abilities of the self. It means turning on your own light and letting it shine. Self expression is a yes response. Inhibition is a no response. It chokes off self expression, turns off or dims your light. In shadowboxing, you practice self expression with a no inhibiting factor present. You learn the correct moves and you form a mental map, which is retained in memory, a broad, general, flexible map. Then, when you face a crisis where an actual menace or inhibiting factor is present, you've learned to act calmly and correctly. There's a carryover in your muscles, nerves, and brain form from the practice to the actual situation. Moreover, because your learning's been relaxed and pressure free, you'll be able to rise to the occasion, extemporize, improvise, and act spontaneously. At the same time, your shadowboxing is building a mental image of yourself, acting correctly and successfully. The memory of this successful self image also enables you to perform better. Dry shooting is a secret of good marksmanship. A novice on the pistol range will quite often find that he can hold the handgun perfectly still and motionless as long as he's not trying to shoot. When he aims an empty gun at a target, his hand is steady. When the same gun's loaded and he attempts to make a score, purpose tremor sets in. The gun barrel uncontrollably moves up and down, back and forth, much the same way that your hand tremors when you attempt to thread a needle. See Chapter 11. Almost to a man, all good pistol coaches recommend lots of dry run target shooting, to overcome this situation. What that means is the marksman will calmly and deliberately take aim, cock and snap the handgun at a target on the wall. Calmly and deliberately, he pays attention to just how he's holding the gun. Whether he's canted or not, whether he's squeezing or jerking the trigger. He learns good habits calmly. There's no purpose tremor because there's no over carefulness. There's no over anxiety for results. After 1,000 or so dry runs, the novice will find that he can hold a loaded gun and actually shoot it while maintaining the same mental attitude and going through the same calm, deliberate physical motions. A friend of mine, he learned to shoot quail in much the same manner. A good shot on the skeet range, the roar of a quail as it took off, and his anxiety for results or overmotivation caused him to miss every time, nearly. But on his next hunt, and after learning about shadowboxing, he carried an empty shotgun the first day. There was no need to get excited because he couldn't shoot it anyway. No need for overmotivation when you're carrying an empty gun. He shot some 20 quail that day with the empty gun. By the time he'd made his first 6 shots, all anxiety and jitteriness left him, and his companions thought he'd lost a few of his buttons. But he redeemed himself the next day when he killed his first 8 birds and got a total 15 quail out of 17 shot. Dang! Shadow boxing helps you hit the ball. Not long ago, I visited a friend of mine one Sunday in a suburb of New York. His 10-year-old son, he had visions of becoming a big league baseball star. His fielding was adequate, but he couldn't hit it. Each time his father threw the ball across the plate, the boy froze up and missed it a foot. I decided to try something. You're so anxious to hit the ball. You're so afraid that you won't, that you can't even see it clearly, I said. All that tension and anxiety was interfering with his eyesight and his reflexes. His arm muscles, they weren't executing the orders from his brain. For the next 10 pitches, I said, don't even try to hit the ball. Just try it all. Don't try it all. Keep your bat on your shoulder, but watch the ball very carefully. Keep your eyes on it from the time it leaves your daddy's hand until it goes by you. Stand easy and loose and just watch the ball go by. After 10 trials of this, I advised him, now for a while, watch the ball go by and keep the bat on your shoulder, but just think to yourself, you're going to bring the bat around so it will really hit the ball solidly in the dead center. After this, I told him to keep on feeling that same way, and keep watching the ball carefully and not let the bat come around and meet the ball, making no attempt to hit it hard. And keep watching the ball carefully and to just let the bat come around and meet the ball, making no attempt to hit it that hard at all. The boy did hit the ball. After a few easy hits like this, he was knocking the ball a country mile, and I had a friend for life. It's a great story because my middle son plays baseball, which my middle son's birthday is in 2 days, or tomorrow, actually. What am I saying? 2 days. It's today and then all day tomorrow, Monday, January 20th, Inauguration Day. Donald Trump will become the president for the second time in the United States of America. The salesman who practiced not selling. You can use the same technique to hit the ball in selling, teaching, or running a business. A young salesman complained to me and told me that he froze up when calling upon prospects. His one big trouble was his inability to properly reply to the prospect's objection. When a prospect raises an objection or criticizes my product, I can't think of a thing to say at the time, but he says, later, I can think of all the good things and good ways to handle the objection. I told him about shadowboxing and about the kid who learned to bat a ball by just letting it go with the bat and hold the bat on his shoulder. I pointed out to hit a baseball or to think on your feet, it requires good reflexes. Your automatic success mechanism, it must respond appropriately and automatically. Too much tension, too much motivation, too much anxiety for results, it'll jam the mechanism. You think of the proper answers later because you're relaxed and the pressure is off. Right now, your trouble is you're not responding quickly and spontaneously to the objections that your prospect throws at you. In other words, you're not hitting the ball that the prospect throws. You're missing those curveballs. I told him, first of all, to practice a number of imaginary interviews, actually walking in, introducing himself to a prospect, making a sales pitch, and then imagining every possible objection, no matter how screwballish, and answering it out loud. Next, he was able to practice with his bat on his shoulder and an actual live client. He was able to go in with an empty gun as far as intents and purposes were concerned. The purpose of the sales interview would not be to sell, but he'd resigned himself to being satisfied with no order. The purpose of the call would be strictly practice with bat on the shoulder, so to speak, or an empty gun practice. In his own words, this shadow boxing, it worked like a miracle. As a young medical student, I used to shadowbox surgical operations on cadavers. This no pressure practice taught me much more than just technique. It taught me a future surgeon calmness, deliberateness, clear thinking, because he'd practiced all these things in a situation that wasn't do or die, life or death. That's really genius if you think about what the medical schools teaching these surgeons to operate first on cadavers, because there's no life or death situation or consequence, rather, if you screw up, if you carve it up, it's not going to die again. It's a dead body. But now they can have that broad mind map, learn all the possible ways and get the negative feedback loops that aren't life or death feedbacks, but like, don't cut there, don't do that. And they can remain calm. And then in the life or death situation, they kick in those automatic learned response mechanisms and get creative and be adaptive and thinking on their feet and actually work miracles, like he said when he was going to make the sales pitch. How to make your nerves work for you. The word crisis, well, it comes from a Greek word which means literally decisiveness or a point of decision. A crisis or a fork in the road. One fork holds a promise of a better condition, while the other one a worse condition. In medicine, the crisis is a turning point where the patient either gets worse and dies or gets better and lives. Thus, every crisis situation is two pronged. The pitcher, who goes in on the ninth inning with the score tied and three men on the bases, who can become a hero and gain in prestige, or he can become a villain who loses the game. Hugh Casey was one of the most successful and the calmest relief pitchers of all time. He was once asked what he thought of when he sent in a game in the middle of a crisis situation. I always think about it, about what I'm going to do and what I want to happen, he said. Instead of what the batter's going to do or what may actually happen to me, he said he concentrated on what he wanted to have happen, felt as if that he could make it happen, and then he actually did it. The same attitude is another important key to reacting well in any crisis situation. If we can maintain an aggressive attitude, react aggressively instead of negatively to threats and crises, the very situation itself can act as a stimulus to release untapped powers. I'm just thinking in terms of reacting to a crisis that might trigger my anger, for instance. My untapped power could be supernatural and that I'm warm and loving and responsive and not the expected response, but one that's actually helping to diffuse the situation. And people would look around me and be like, wow, that's crazy. That's supernatural. Yes, it is. We all have it within us, the genius gift within us. Several years ago, newspapers carried the story about a giant of a Negro. He once went to two wrecking trucks and a score of men, and he did what two wrecking trucks and a score of men couldn't do. He raised the crushed metal cab of a truck off its pinned driver. He ripped out with his bare hands the brake pedal, which had the driver's foot trapped, and he beat out the flames in the floor of the cab with his bare hands. Later, when this giant was found and identified, he turned out not to be a giant at all. Charles Dennis Jones, he was 6'2" and he weighed 220. A big dude, but not a giant by any means. His explanation for his extraordinary feat, I hate fire, 14 months later, before his 8-year-old daughter had burned to death in a fire which had leveled his residence. Dang. That's from A Man Who Don't Know What He Can Do, Reader's Digest, October 1952. I know a tall, rather frail man who single handedly somehow managed to carry an upright piano out of his house, down 3 steps, and over a 4-inch curb, out to the center of his lawn when his house was on fire. It required 6 strong men to place the piano in the house. One rather frail man, under the stimulus of excitement and crisis, took it out by himself. This is the second s- skill set to learn here. It's crisis brings power. A neurologist has made an extensive study in extraordinary powers. This is Dr. J.A. Hatfield. Physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual powers which come to the aid of ordinary men and women in times of crisis. How wonderful is the way in which, with quite ordinary folk, power leaps to our aid in any time of emergency, he says. We lead timid lives, shrinking from difficult tasks till perhaps we're forced into them our own or by ourselves, and we determine on them. And immediately we seem to unlock these unseen forces. When we have to face danger, when courage comes, when trial puts a long continued strain upon us, we find ourselves possessed by the power to endure, or when disaster ultimately brings the fall with which so long we dread, we feel unearthed as if the strength as of the everlasting comes to arms. Common experience teaches us that when great demands are made upon us, if only we fearlessly accept the challenge and confidently expand our strength, every danger or difficulty brings its own strength. As thy days, so shall thy strength be. The secret lies in the attitude of fearlessly accepting the challenge and confidently expending our strength. This means maintaining an aggressive, a goal oriented, goal directed attitude rather than a defensive, evasive, negative one. No matter what happens, I can handle it or I can see it through rather than I hope nothing happens. Keep your goal in mind. The essence of this aggressive attitude is remaining goal oriented. You keep your own positive goal in mind and you intend to go through the crisis experience to achieve your goal. You keep your original positive goal and you don't get sidetracked into secondary ones. The desire to run away, to hide, to avoid by the crisis situation, or in the language of William James, your attitude is one of fight instead of the one of fear of flight. If you can do this, the crisis situation itself acts as a stimulus which releases the additional power to help you accomplish your goal. Lucky once said that the purpose of emotion is reinforcement or additional strength rather than to serve as a sign of weakness. He believed that there was only one basic emotion, excitement, and that excitement manifests itself as fear, anger, courage, etc. Depending upon our own inner goals at the time, whether we're inwardly organized to conquer a problem, run away from it, or even destroy it, the real problem is not to control emotion, but to control the choice of which tendency shall receive emotional reinforcement. If your intention or your attitude goal is to go forward, if it's to make the most of this crisis situation and to win out in spite of it, then the excitement of the occasion will reinforce this tendency. It will just give you more courage, more strength to go forward. If you lose sight of your original goal and your attitude goal becomes one of running away from a crisis or seeking somehow to get past it by evading it, this running away tendency will also be reinforced. You'll experience fear and anxiety. Don't mistake excitement for fear. Many people have made the mistake of habitually interpreting the feeling of excitement as fear and anxiety, and therefore interpreting it as proof of inadequacy. Any normal person who's intelligent enough to understand the situation becomes excited or nervous just before a crisis situation. Until you direct it toward a goal, this excitement is neither fear, anxiety, courage, confidence, nor anything else other than a stepped up, reinforced supply of emotional steam in your boiler. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of additional strength to be used in any way you choose. Jack Dempsey used to get so nervous before a fight that he wouldn't shave himself. His excitement was such that he couldn't sit or stand still. He didn't, however, interpret his excitement as fear. He didn't decide that he should run away because of it. He went forward. He used the excitement to put extra dynamite into his blows. Experienced actors know that this feeling of excitement just before a performance is a good token. Many of them deliberately work themselves up emotionally just before going on stage. The good soldier is usually the man who feels excited just before battle. Many people place their bets at racetracks on the basis of a white horse appear just to be most nervous just before going into the post. It's interesting. He said earlier in this book, a few chapters ago, that, he would see people at the roulette table. They were just super calm and chilling. And then once they put their money on the table, they were freaking out the entire time, worrying if they were going to get red or black or their number. And he's like, what's the point in worrying after you placed your bet? Do all your worrying and calculating and speculating and predicting your future and outcome before you place your bet, because that's what you can control. You can decide not to bet. You can do something about it. That's why it made sense to freak out. But once you became nervous after the thing started, there was no point and there was undue stress to put upon you. He's like, just stay calm at that point. There's nothing you can do about the outcome, the results at that point. Maybe some believe there is that you can, but like, let's be honest, like majority of us, there's not going to be anything we can do about it once we start spinning it. At least that's what we'll believe, right? The observed effect. Many people place their bets at a racetrack on the basis which a horse appears to be the most nervous just before going to the post. Trainers also know that a horse which becomes nervous or spirited just before a race will perform better than the usual. The term spirited is a good one. The excitement that you just feel before a crisis situation is an infusion of spirit. Ooh, and it should be so interpreted by you. Wow. That's very interesting. Often those jitters that we may feel before our race, if we're well trained and practiced and we know the thing how to do it, but we're getting jittery, is actually an infusion of spirit. We're channeling that like greater strength within us. We're about ready to tap into it. That's what happens when these scared horses come in play, and the gunfire goes off and the race begins, and they can actually just spontaneously react to their environment naturally, and their automatic mechanism, their muscle memory kicks in, and they win the race. Not long ago, I met a man on a plane whom I'd not seen for several years. In the course of a conversation, I asked him if he still made any public speeches that he had done in the past. Yes, he said. As a matter of fact, he changed jobs so he'd be able to speak more and now made at least one public speech every day. Knowing his love for public speaking, I commented that it was good for him to have this type of work. Yes, he said. In one way, it's good, but in another way, it's not so good. I don't make as many good speeches as I used to. I speak often that it's become an old hat to me, and I no longer feel that little tingly feeling and that it was in the pit of my stomach, which tells me that I'm going to do okay. I don't have those tingles in my stomach, which tell me that I'm going to do well. Some people become so excited during an important written exam that they're unable to think clearly or even hold a pencil steady in their hands. While other people become so aroused under the same circumstances, they perform over their heads. Their minds work better and clearer than usual. Their memory sharpen, and it's not to the excitement per se which makes a difference, but how it's used. Skill number 3. What's the worst that can possibly happen? Many people have a tendency to magnify out of all proportion the potential, penalty, or failure which the crisis situation holds. We use our imagination against ourselves. We make mountains out of molehills. Else, we don't use our imagination at all to see what the situation really holds, but habitually and unthinkingly react as if every simple opportunity or threat were a life or death matter. If you face a real crisis, you need a lot of excitement. The excitement can be used as good advantage in a crisis situation. However, if you overestimate the danger or difficulty, if you react to information that's faulty, distorted, or unrealistic, you're likely to call up much more excitement than the occasional calls for. Because the real threat is much less than you've estimated, all this excitement can't be used appropriately. It cannot be gotten rid of through creative action. Therefore, it remains inside of you. Bottled up is the jitters. A big excess of emotional excitement can harm rather than help performance simply because it's inappropriate. Philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell tells us of a technique which he used to go use on himself to good advantage in toning down excessive excitement. Some misfortune threatens, consider seriously and deliberately what it is, the very worst that could possible thing that could happen. Having looked at any possible misfortune in the face, it gives yourself sound reasons for thinking that after all, it wouldn't be so much of a terrible disaster. Such reasons always exist, since at the worst, nothing that happens to oneself has any cosmic importance. When you've looked for some time steadily at the worst possibility and you've said to yourself with real conviction, well, after all, nothing would matter so very much, you'll find that your worry diminishes to a quite extraordinary extent. It may be necessary to repeat the process a few times, but in the end, if you've shirked nothing in facing the worst possible issue, you'll find that your worry disappears altogether and is replaced by a kind of exhilaration. By Bertrand Russell, The Conquest of Happiness. That is what I was talking about earlier, is when I was about ready to speak in public and my body, my nerves, everything inside me started kicking in like I'm going to die. I would go beyond the edge of the completion of that thing. I would go to the vision beyond the vision and be like, what are the outcomes? Worst thing that can happen is I screw up. I got to come back and do this thing again. That's happened a bunch of times before because I'd let that nervousness of speaking in public kick in, fear. I wasn't speaking as clearly and communicating as effectively and getting people to buy into my message. And I have to go back, run some more experiments or summarize my data, come back and talk and do it again. Best possible outcome is everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's genius with a J. And let's go ahead and close up this topic and move on. And he doesn't have to come back and speak again. I wasn't in a job where I was speaking regularly. I was in an advanced technology development group that was only coming in like a consultant would and speaking to critical issues. If I own an issue, yeah, I'd have to provide periodic regular updates, but even that wasn't regular or required in my job role. There were others that it was part of their job role required to speak all the time. So when I got this practice, I would actually just go to that vision beyond the vision and be like, it's not a big deal. And then I became more calm. How Carlyle found courage. Carlyle has testified, and how the same method changed his outlook from an everlasting no to an everlasting yea. Yes, he was in a period of deep spiritual despair. My lodestars were blotted out, and the canopy of grim fire shone no star. The universe was one huge, dead, immeasurable steam engine, just rolling on in its dead indifference to grind me limb from limb. Then, in the midst of this spiritual bankruptcy, came a new way of life, and I asked myself, what art thou afraid of? Wherefore, like a coward, dost thou forever pip and whimper and go cowering and trembling? Despicable, bite. What's the sum total of the worst that lies before thee? Death? Well, death and say the pangs of Tophet too, and all that the devil and man may, will or can do against thee. Hast thou not a heart? Canst thou not suffer whatso it be? So, as a child of freedom, thou outcast trample Tophet itself under thy feet, while it consumes thee. Let it come, then I will meet and defy it. And so I thought, there rushed like a stream of fire over my whole soul, and I shook base, fear away from me forever. I was strong, of unknown strength, a spirit, almost a god. Ever from that time, the temper of my misery was changed, not fear or whining, sorrow was it, but indignation and grim fire eyed defiance. Carlyle of Sartor Restartus. So Russell and Carlyle, they're telling us how we can maintain an aggressive, goal-directed, self-determining attitude even in the presence of very real and serious threats and dangers. Mountain climbing over molehills. Most of us, however, allow ourselves to be thrown off course by very minor or even imaginary threats, which we insist upon interpreting as life or death or do or die situations. Someone has said that the greatest cause of ulcers is mountain climbing over molehills. A salesman calling upon an important prospect, it may act as if he were just a mere matter of life or death. A, de- a, bu- debu- a debutante facing her first ball may act as if she were a trial for her life going on a trial for her life. Many people going to be interviewed about a job act as if they were scared to death, and so on. Perhaps this life or death feeling that many of us experience in any sort of crisis situation, it's a heritage from our dim and distant past when failure to primitive man usually was synonymous with death. You got gobbled up by the saber-toothed tiger. Regardless of its origin, however, experience of numerous patients has shown that it can be cured by calmly and rationally analyzing the situation. Ask yourself, what's the worst that can possibly happen if I fail? Rather than responding automatically, blindly, and irrationally. What have you got to lose? Close scrutiny will show you that most of these everyday so called crisis situations are not life or death matters at all, but opportunities to either advance or stay where you are. For example, what's the worst that can happen to a salesman? He'll either get an order and come out better off than he was, or he won't get the order and he'll be no worse off than when he made the call. If you don't get the sale, nothing really changes. Only good things could happen. So why be afraid of taking a sales call? The applicant will either get the job or not get it. If he fails to get it, then he'll be in the same position as was before he even asked. About the worst that can happen to the debutante, as she'll remain as she was before the ball, basically relatively unknown and create no great stir in any social circles. Few people realize just how potent such a simple change of attitude can be. One salesman I know doubled his income after he was able to change his attitude from a scary, panicky, everything depends upon me outlook to an attitude of I've got everything to gain and really nothing to lose. Walter Pidgeon, the actor, he shows us how his first public performance was a complete flop. He was literally scared to death. However, between acts, he reasoned with himself that he'd already failed, therefore he has really nothing to lose. And if he gave up acting altogether, he would just be a complete failure as an actor, and therefore he really had nothing to worry about going back on. He went out in the second act, relaxed, confident, crushed it, made a big hit. Remember, above all, the key to any crisis situation is you. Practice and learn the simple techniques of this chapter, and you, like hundreds of others before you, can learn to make crisis work for you rather than against you by making crisis a creative opportunity. And that's the end of chapter 13. And we're going to go dive right in the next two chapters, finish this book off. We're going to pick up Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil. I was going to do Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich in first order, but a friend of mine has recommended this book now twice, and it's in his 2025 top books to read. And so we're going to be reading this. I first read this book. You can see how much like markings I'm flipping through these pages. And I remember marking up almost every single page. That's how deep this book was for me. It was written, I believe, in 1937, and it was kept in secrecy. Like kept in some form of like a uh, treasure chest or something like this. And then um, the foundation, the Napoleon Hill Foundation, which is legacy from his family. I think it was like his great grand or his granddaughter or grandson, something like that. Somebody actually found the manuscript, the original manuscript, which when you look in the book, we actually have handwritten notes from Napoleon Hill of him actually editing the original typed version of a manual typewriter and handwritten notes from the original manuscript of this book. And it was released in 2011. So it was only released 14 years ago. And about, you know, five ish or more years ago, I read this book for the first time and it blew me away, blew my socks off. So I'm really excited to get into it. So another question was asked to me again was, how do I stay consistent when things are difficult for me to do? And I kind of have to white knuckle approach and push right through it. What I've learned is doing this daily chapter a day, reading a book is, not necessarily like something fun and I would love to do. Um, Editing these videos and publishing them every day is not necessarily fun and the thing that I want to do. But what is fun, the thing that I do like to do is actually talk and like record myself and like have something to say. I do like that. Also, I do like creating the thumbnails. Like it's kind of fun when I get to create new designs in Canva and I get to just think creatively and just like we read in this chapter, be automatic in my response, being able to be creative and just yes and create something rather than get stuck and slow things down and take longer time to create it because I'm getting, stuck and feeling challenged. I'm stacking. I'm stacking. I'm like in the book Atomic Habits, which we're going to read after the Napoleon Hill books. And I'm stacking like good things, the things that I like to do with things that I don't necessarily like to do. If I need to start running as a new habit in the morning, if like that's going to get me the most success at losing weight or whatever, which is working out. Because if I work out a bunch, I'll probably eat more healthy. Well, if the first thing I needed to do if I needed to run is just put my shoes next to my bed and my gym clothes right next to my bed, then when I wake up, first thing I do is I slip into those clothes, pop into my shoes, and I go out for a run, grab my dog, grab my doggy doo-doo bags, and then I go out for a run, regardless if it's warm or cold. Because I live in a four-season environment where it gets really extremely cold or really extremely hot. And for 2 parts of the year, sometimes it's really nice, mild, and temperate and beautiful. And that's how you do these. You stack, you value stack the things that you don't want to do with the things that you do love doing. And then all of a sudden it becomes automatic. So another thing that's motivated me to keep reading a chapter a day and get it done any time of the day, but the best time of the day to get the big rocks of your day done is in the morning, is that Outwitting the Devil is on my shelf and it's right here next to Psycho-Cybernetics because it's reminding me, like, dude, you're almost done with Psycho-Cybernetics. You've got 2 more chapters left to go. And we've not even gone into what was the most transformative chapter for me when I first read this, when I went into this calming place state movie of my mind and I heard the phone ring and I ignored the phone. And I've got this little house that's on this like rocky cliff or rocky beach. There's two giant. There's mountainous areas surrounding this little beach house that's got you know vivid bright red and light baby blue pillows in a singular orange couch in this home that has nothing in it. It's just, wooden floorboards and it's got a red pitched roof and a uh, white painted house. Vinyl or siding, siding. There's like horizontal slat siding on this house, and there's waves crashing, and I can hear the seagulls. I can hear the phone ringing, and the phone is starting to quiet down and diminish while the seagulls are chirping and there's sand and there's beach and I can hear the rolling crashing waves. So I can hear the crashing waves, I hear the seagulls, and there's a phone, and I go inside this house and it's peaceful, it's quiet. So that little like practice movie that I created almost a decade ago when I read this book Psycho-Cybernetics for the first time, it has been the thing that I haven't practiced much of. I haven't used much of that little thought experiment, and I'm pretty sure it's coming up in the next 2 chapters. And we're almost there. And Outwitting the Devil is next. And I'm super excited to read it again from a different perspective. I'm reading it down the road in my life. I've already gone through this thing and I've marked it up with a whole bunch of you know pens and markers, and I'm interested to see what I underlined previously, which does it resonate the same with me. That's what's fun about reading books again for more than once in your life. You'll get to learn new things. So I hope you're learning some new things and you're putting into practice daily some new things. And if you have any questions, you comment below or join school.com/, the corporate escape artist, and you look into your soul and extract out of you something that you didn't know existed and share with us. Let me know what's going on. If you have hurts or challenges or other questions, ask them in the group, in the community, and I respond to them here. And this is like a daily vlog as well as a podcast to help you grow and learn and become. And until next time, freedom fighter, here's to your great escape.